Hello, welcome to you, me, and FIDO. Thank you. It's really great to be here. I always enjoy MacDevOps. Great shout out to all the fine folks, Matt, and all the rest who put this together. As this is, I think it's definitely been one of the better, if not the best, conference that is done live like this in these weird times. And that's why I've got to make sure that I have all of your wonderful audience feedback. I've got Discord up over here so I can interact with you live while we do this presentation, because I think that's a pretty cool way of doing things. And then it's great. I've asked Felipe and the amazing team here to pipe through some of your thoughts and feelings when I go through this session, because I wanted to make sure that we try to make this as much like we were in person as possible. And so for that, I really thank everybody for doing that, as that's been a really good thing, and able to have everybody here with us as we go along through it. So thank you. Great. So session is you, me, and FIDO. And we're going to be chatting about FIDO authentication, kind of how we do a lot of this stuff. I'm Joel, I'm from Jamf, have done some of these things, and we're going to show you off some of that as we go through this. So a little bit, as with every year that we do this, it is really fantastic to have WWDC the same week as MacDevOps, because it means all of our slides and topics will be super, super fresh with all the latest and most amazing topics from Apple and everything else that's in there. And in this case, Apple kind of did some changes, some good stuff. We're going to talk about this before we finish, because we've managed to put all these pieces in here. But the whole conversation here is going to be on FIDO, as that's what most people are thinking of when we go through this. However, Apple seems to have kind of done a lot more focus lately on WebAuthn. So WebAuthn, maybe you could pronounce it WebAuthn if you wanted to kind of slur it all together. That's a part of the FIDO spec that goes along with it. And so when you look through the Apple documentation, especially the stuff that's come out in the last couple of days, you're going to see a lot of references to WebAuthn here. You will, however, not see any references to FIDO. I've got some thoughts about that, but we'll come up at the end. And since this is YouTube, I feel obligated to say, mash the subscribe button and hit the like button. And then somewhere else, there's going to be a link to other things, right? I don't know what all the things are. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So without further ado, let's get into what is FIDO, right? Let's actually start at the beginning and kind of go through this a little bit. We've got some great kind of interactive sessions in here. We'll do some live demos that we can work on and be able to kind of show you what's actually going on behind the scenes as we do this. So with that, we've got FIDO, which stands for, it's kind of a bit of a maybe manufactured. Jamf is a member of the FIDO Alliance, so maybe some obligatory disclaimers here, but it is kind of a manufactured name. It's Fast Identity Online, and I guess identity in there should have had a capital D, but maybe all the good names are taken, right? So anyway, it's more than just for identity. It's got some really cool follow-on things to it. And I'm very excited about the technology. It is a really cool technology. There are, however, a few things to think about as you look to roll this out across your larger organization. And so we'll talk about that as we go through this. A couple of main points about FIDO. It was really designed for consumer protection, specifically against phishing. All right. Wanted to make sure that grandma, whoever, when they signed into their Facebook, MySpace, whatever account, would be able to not, get compromised. And so that's where FIDO really kind of started. How can we make a fast identity online that would allow online users to be secure and all of the rest? So with that is one of the things that's a part of this. There's also a very heavy focus on privacy and prevention of tracking. And a big part of that is making sure that you stay anonymous. Many of us use Apple products. specifically because of some of the privacy implications, or at least we use them maybe more than we would have otherwise because of Apple's stance on privacy. FIDO has a very, very similar stance on privacy. And there's a few things in here that as an administrator may frustrate you a little bit, but as a user, you'll feel very happy about because they do keep your identity very private and don't even allow websites, if you're using the same FIDO key, for example, across different websites, it's very hard to track across that, almost impossible. So other thing, even though it's been around for a couple of years, we're already on FIDO version 2. We'll get into some of the specifics and some of the terminology there. But it seems to have started growing really quickly in the last year or so. A couple of years that have been out there, many of you may have YubiKeys from even 5-6 years ago that have had this functionality, but it's really seemed to ramp in just the kind of most recent couple of months, couple of years. And I think part of that is evidenced by Apple coming in with the ability to do a lot more WebAuthn functionality directly within your apps. So I do believe it is very much growing in adoption. And part of that is because it's not just for Bitcoin, right? If you've been following FIDO and some of these other things for a little while, FIDO has been big in the Bitcoin space, and a lot of the FIDO keys started as wallets. I think that's the right term. My $50 investment in Bitcoin is lower than $50 right now, but don't treat me for investment advice. It's not what I'm here for. All right, so it's not just for Bitcoin. And the other big thing that kind of changed this is if you're on the Windows side, Microsoft made a big splash with Windows Hello not too long ago, a couple of years now, I guess. And FIDO is used extensively throughout Windows Hello. And so you're able to actually walk up to a Windows 10 system for quite a while now and use a FIDO key to sign in if that's what you want to do, and also uses it with Azure. All right, so that's the other big place is that it started coming online. So here's a few of the places where you can find FIDO today. Most of the identity providers, and that's the new Azure logo. When I was looking for logos yesterday and tweaking the slides, I saw a brand new Azure logo. So there you go. That's the big blue A. Okta allows you to use it. Facebook now has FIDO. So if you're a consumer and you're not and you don't want to use a password anymore, you can use FIDO for that. Twitter, GitHub's had FIDO support for quite a while. So there's an awful lot of places now using it, which I think also helps with this recent kind of uptake in adoption that's been going on with it. So that's really cool. It means you're not alone. There's a lot of other folks that are out there and able to do those kinds of things. All right, so real quick, let's get into what a FIDO flow is. It's got some different terminology, and we'll be using that terminology through the rest of this session. So it's kind of important that we use them correctly so that we don't get confused about what the things that we're talking about. Primarily 3 different parts to when you're using FIDO. One is you've got a web page. In this case, maybe it's Okta, right? So we're going to sign into Okta and get our Okta credentials and be able to use those somewhere else. You've got a Mac. This could be an iPhone because FIDO works on iPhone. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And you've got a key, which is maybe the hardware that you have, or it could be actually the device. Because Apple now has platform authenticators. We'll cover that in a little bit. But these are the main 3 parts. A web page that you're going to, some sort of computer or browser that you're using, and then something that's holding your credentials, who you are, the private key that's going to be used to sign you in. So the web page, you'll hear that referred to as the relying party. The Mac, the device that you're using is the platform. Sometimes you'll hear it referenced as the user agent, which is really confusing because that's always a term that's being used somewhere else. And then for the key itself, you'll hear it referred to as an authenticator. So the authenticator is the key itself or whatever actually holds your private key, your identity. The platform or the user agent is what's kind of negotiating between your authenticator and the relying party. And then the relying party is the actual web page that you're trying to go to. And it doesn't have to be a web page. Relying party could be just an app or something else. We'll cover that a little bit later as well. However, probably 99% of what you're seeing out there today is that you're using a connection to a web page to be able to do this. All right. The communication between the relying party and the platform, that's where WebAuthn comes in. All right. And that's primarily done as JSON. So when you look at it, it's going to look familiar. It's JSON. You're going to be able to see what's kind of going back and forth between that. So that's WebAuthn. WebAuthn can be used for more than FIDO, but FIDO seems to be the biggest thing that's being used with right now. All right. We'll talk about that again as we'll break down the protocol a little bit. Now, between the platform and the Authenticator, which could be done in a variety of ways, the most common one is going to be USB, but you could also do it over NFC if you have an iPhone. Those work really well. Or earlier on, it's kind of changed a bit. Since then, it's now going all the way back to, for a while, it's harder to use this, but they did have some support for Bluetooth. Chrome is trying to bring that back in. We'll chat about that in a bit as well. So primarily it's going to be USB or NFC if it's not a local authenticator. And that is done over a format called CBOR, Compact Binary Order, I believe is what that stands for. And the actual protocol, so the comparison to WebAuthn between the relying party and the platform, the actual protocol between the platform and the authenticator is called CTAP, Client to Authenticator protocol. So really nice and easy acronym to remember there. And we're on CTAP 2 now, for whatever that's worth to any of you out there. And CBOR, it's probably a little bit different. If you're used to APDUs, CBOR is a lot like an APDU. That probably doesn't mean much to a lot of you, and that's fine. We'll show you some examples here shortly. All right, so some example authenticators, and there's two types of authenticators that are out there. One is what used to be called roaming authenticators, which are now called cross-platform authenticators. And these are authenticators that you can move ideally from device to device. So most of these are going to be NFC. There's a Lightning one on there that you can see. That's a YubiKey, and that will work with Lightning-enabled iOS devices. It will not, however, well, the Lightning port doesn't work on the new USB-C ones if you get a new iPad, but there is a USB-C port on there, and those do work as a YubiKey on those. So that is fantastic. And you're able to do that. So that's good. There's the blue YubiKey in there. That's FIDO only. Some of the other YubiKeys will do more things, like PIV cards and stuff like that. The blue one is FIDO only. That's the cheaper. I think that runs about 20 bucks. The one with the Lightning port, I think, is 70. So, and the rest are kind of a mix in between there. In the upper right-hand corner, that's Thetis. That one actually has biometrics on it. That little square there is, in fact, a, and I have one around here somewhere. Whatever. That one's actually a fingerprint reader. Gets a little bit weird when you plug it in. You got to maneuver your fingerprint reader allowed it to do that. And I'm not, you know, there's some interesting things there, but I'm not certain it's really where you want to go. Over on the left are some more ones. Those, I believe, are Phaeton ones, and it's actually one of my favorite ones. This is the Phaeton. It's like a K82 or something like that. And this has a little fingerprint reader into it there as well. However, these run about 100 bucks. It's kind of fun. It does Bluetooth. It's got a USB-C port on it, but they are kind of big. And I don't know that a lot of people are really excited about plugging things into things anymore. This M1 that I'm working on only has 2 ports. I actually had to put in a dock to be able to use an external monitor, this microphone, and my YubiKey at the same time. Otherwise, it would have gotten a little bit more awkward. So keep that in mind going forward as you do there. And there are even some that will have FIDO built into what you would otherwise think is a smart card. HID makes some of them. This is from GoTrust, and it's got, and you can see if I get in real close, there's the FIDO logo right there. And that you can see that everything is in that. So this actually works as a FIDO key, I believe, over Bluetooth, which is what's a little bit flaky. So this is where most people started to think of FIDO keys here, were these kind of cross-platform authenticators. And I forgot to mention, there is another one called the Solo key, which is open source. You can get those on Indiegogo. Those, I think, are like 40, 20 bucks, 30 bucks, somewhere around in there. And then you actually do some of your own development with it. If you're looking to just play around and get started, if you want to go super cheap, get one of the blue ones. They're about 20 bucks, or just look on Amazon for any of them. You can find a couple for about that and be able to do that. Make sure you get, obviously, the right USB port, A, C, B, whatever, to match whatever your hardware is. Otherwise, you're looking at the $70 for the YubiKey, or upwards of 100 for some of these other ones that are out there. So a lot of varieties out there. This is what people normally thought of like 3 or 4 years ago when you said FIDO. one of these little USB things. Recently, and Apple is, they weren't the first of this party, but they've been catching up. Chrome came out really, really early with very strong support for what's called a platform authenticator. And that's allowing you to use the browser to actually manage these keys. On the M1s, actually on any Macs with a secure enclave, I don't even know if this works on Macs without a secure enclave. Somebody can find that out and put it in here. You'll be able to use this and it'll store the keys in the secure enclave on your Mac, which is fantastic. It'll do that for iOS as well. So you'll be able to use iPads and other things that have a secure enclave and be able to use that there. So that's great. These are called platform authenticators because ideally they kind of stay with the platform. They're not roaming or cross-platform. Apple has blurred those lines. We'll talk about that before we get finished here recently. But this allows you to have then, sign into GitHub, for example, in Chrome, and then you can go into your preferences and you can say, set up everything that I have here and able to use this and set it up as a FIDO key. You'll then, touch your key here, and then you'll be able to communicate and go through and create a FIDO key locally inside Chrome. Then the next time you sign into GitHub, all you have to do is click a little link that says sign in with my FIDO key, hit the Touch ID, and you'll be on your way. You'll never have to remember that password again. So that's still some good stuff that's in there. So platform authenticators, this will allow you to play around with these things immediately. And we'll show you that here very shortly. Here's this chart of all the different browsers that are out there, or at least the kind of major ones, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari, and what they support. So this gives you an idea. For example, if you are using your phone, you can use Face ID, but there's no real USB support, and there is no Bluetooth support either for using the phone with authenticators if you're using Safari. Brave is not on here, but I will shout out to Brave. I think it was the first browser on iOS that was able to support WebAuthn and then some of the FIDO keys that are in there. So cool. All right. So at the end of the day, what you need to think about is if you're using a Mac, it's USB or using the Touch ID on the device. And if you're using an iPhone, that's that new kind of Eastery purple color there. It's NFC or Face ID and Touch ID. And this may be one of the more interesting things that you do with NFC on the phone, is it does work out really well. In fact, sometimes too well, like you'll pull your phone out of your pocket, and if you keep your, where they all go, here they go. So I've got a collection of, and look at this, we'll do this for some little audio. There you go. I've got a collection of YubiKeys here that I use for testing. And if I keep this in my pocket with my phone, a lot of times when I pull the phone out of the pocket, it'll have already kind of activated and I'll have a link for the NFC side. You can actually turn that part of the YubiKey off. So we'll go there. There's also more exotic FIDO keys. This was something called the Motive. I think they have taken it off of the market. As it just wasn't, I think they got bought by some other kind of enterprisey team, but this was like $300 or $400. It was a health ring. It monitored your blood pressure, whatever you had for lunch that day. I think it changed colors depending on your mood, whatever. But it was also a FIDO key, and they claimed instead of using a pin, it had some way of measuring your gait and how you walked and ensuring that you were the right person using it. So that was out there. It's not there anymore, although I think you could still find a couple on Amazon if you really wanted to. This is another one that I ran across recently. Kind of looks like a car key almost, is about the size, called Cryonic, but it's actually got an LCD display on it. And there are a few of these out there. They tend more towards the Bitcoin cryptocurrency crowd because they also double in a lot of cases as wallets that you can use for things. This one I think had a very unique method. Since it didn't have a way of inputting your PIN, you would actually write your PIN on the table, and it had enough motion sensors in it that when you put a pin on your FIDO key, you would be able to use this. So that was a little weird. I haven't bought one of those. I don't even think it's out. I think they're taking pre-orders. Be a little careful. There's a lot of FIDO keys that have had pre-orders that never happened, but that could be interesting. So take a look at that. That is the Cryonic. Here's another one that I think is a little more popular, very popular with the Bitcoin crowd, but this is the Trezor, and it works as a FIDO key and as a full-on Bitcoin wallet. So there you go. A lot of different options you have out there. I think these ones, like this, I think was over 100, and I think the Trezor is about that as well. And if I'm pronouncing that wrong, if anyone from Trezor is on the Discord, I apologize. Maybe it's treasure. Maybe we're not supposed to pronounce it weirdly. Anyway, so that's the those are kind of FIDO keys. So they run the gamut from kind of fun ones that are pretty small and easy to have on your keychain to much more exotic ones with Bluetooth and fingerprint sensors and everything else on it. All right. So now you know what they look like. What do they do? All right. So the basic flow, there's a few commands that are part of the CTAP and the WebAuthn protocol, but the two ones that you really care about are creating keys and then using keys. And the option of the creating key is the relying party. So the web page just sends a, hey friend, we'd really like to create a private key, a key pair, and then be able to use that for signing on to this web page in the future. So the relying party sends the request. It's a WebAuthn create command. You'll be able to do that. And then your FIDO key will then create a new unique key pair. They're primarily EC P256 keys. I think the spec allows them to be others, but 98% of what are out there are going to be EC256, which incidentally is exactly the kind of key and the only kind of key that you can get out of your iPhone secure enclave or any secure enclave on an Apple device for that matter. All right, so the relying party, the web page requests a new key to be created. The authenticator itself goes through and creates a brand new key. And this is part of the privacy implications on this, in that every single web page, every single combination of web page and username gets a new unique key with no correspondence between any of those. All right. So when you sign into Facebook, you're going to get a brand new key. And then when you sign into Okta with that same FIDO key, it's going to generate a brand new key pair for Okta. And the point of that is, if I'm, super cool in the background and I'm able to do all this stuff, I couldn't correlate the fact that by you signing in as Fluffy Bunny to Facebook using a particular key in no way gives me any ability to see that signing in as Joel into Okta with another entirely random key. I can't correlate those two, right? And that was a big part of this. Just because you're using the same authenticator for different relying parties in no way means that you can be tracked across those. All right, so FIDO key gets the creation request. It is able to create a new key pair. It then does a few things. It signs a challenge and it sends a copy of the public key and the challenge back to the relying party, at which point the relying party can then validate that signature, make sure that that's correct, and then it establishes the fact that this public key is then usable for this user account when they sign in. There's no certificate involved in this. These are raw public private keys. They're never turned into certificates. Certificates are used for attestation. We'll show that in a little bit. All right. So that's the basic flow on creation. When you go to use it, it's fairly similar. The relying party says, hey, I want you to show me that you have key number, really long key handle that it sends. So it gets a unique ID for each key, sends that unique ID back to the authenticator and says, hey, if you can prove that you have this private key, then I know you're cool. So there's a bit of a challenge, some random data that gets sent. That's what gets signed. So the authenticator uses the private key that corresponds to that key ID. Ideally, the one that you created before, or else this won't work. It will then sign that challenge, sends it back to the relying party. The relying party validates the signature against the known good public key. As long as you can prove you have that private key, you are then authenticated and you are in. So in most cases, a pretty smooth, pretty simple flow here, right? Goods and bads to this. There is no, when you have a certificate and you've got a PKI infrastructure, if you had, for example, a smart card or something else that you would be using, you would have a certificate in that smart card that would prove that smart card maybe came from your organization. There's no real way of doing that with FIDO keys. You're just creating, raw public-private key pairs. Any FIDO key should have a secure enclave in it, or at least the equivalent thereof, where you're able to, these can't be exported. So that's the other safety feature in here. When these public-private key pairs are created, the private key is in some sort of hardware enclave that's in this device and then can't be exported out from that. All right, so that's the basic flow of the use. And now we come to the time where we do a quick demo. All right, so I'm gonna go into Safari here, and there's a web page that I use a lot for this kind of troubleshooting or just playing around, and that is WebAuthn.me. So WebAuthn is a really cool page because it allows you in this debugger. You can just click on debugger up here, and you can actually set up all the parameters of that WebAuthn call that's coming in. So you'll be able to kind of go through this just out of the box. You don't have to touch anything. If you want to play around, you can actually force attestation and some other things in here. But what we're going to do, we're just going to hit register. And Safari is now saying, hey, friend, seems like you want to use a security key to be able to authenticate. I've got the iCloud keychain syncing set up, so we'll chat about that a little bit. But you'll have the option here to use a security key if you have one that's plugged in and it timed out. So we'll do that again. You have the option of using a security key if you have one plugged in. I do. Or you can use the built-in authenticator. So if I hit register and I just hit continue, I'm now going to use my finger on the Touch ID. And then now I've authenticated and I've created a new key pair. You can see the actual response here coming back from the authenticator. We're going to break this down for you in a little bit. So real cool, real easy way of kind of flowing through there. So WebAuthn.me is a great place to go for any sort of kind of playing around with this. All right, so when you register the key, you've got to sign into the web page first. And this is one of the biggest things that's going to be maybe not problematic, but at least of concern for organizational environments. You can't, unlike a smart card, you can't really pre-provision one of these. You have to know, the user has to have some sort of username password to begin with. Then you sign into Okta, Azure, whatever else, and then you're able to actually register this key with it. So just keep that in mind as you go through this process. That you can't necessarily start off from scratch. You have to have the user signed in the first place. So sign into your IDP webpage, whatever that you're using, enroll the security key, and then you have to prove user presence. That's another big piece of the FIDO protocol. We need to prove that a human is somehow involved. When you're using the platform authenticator with one of the web browsers, by touching the Touch ID, you've proven that you're there. If you're using one of the YubiKeys, you'll have this little disc, and this little disc kind of glows yellow. You've got to touch it. Don't touch it too hard. You might break it. Be careful with that. But you've got to touch the disc to prove that you actually have access. If you're using one of the tiny little USB-C ones, this is where things get a little bit more complicated because you've got to go in there and kind of hit these two little contacts on the side to be able to use it. And so that can be a little bit more problematic as you go through there. So that proves user presence. And a big part of that is so that you can't just get a drive-by attack. Just because you went to a web page and you didn't know what you're doing, it doesn't mean suddenly they've got access to your FIDO key, because you have to be touching things, right? Key generates a new public-private key, generates the response, and then that public key is associated with the user. This is the WebAuthn that gets sent down. It's pretty simple. It's usually a name of the relying party. This would be typically some sort of web page, WebAuthn.me, Facebook.com, something along those lines. It gives a username that will be associated with the key pair on the authenticator, and then it gives a challenge. The challenge prevents any sort of replay attacks. Because what you're doing is you're going to sign that challenge. You take the relying party information, so the name of the web page, some other stuff. You take the challenge, you combine those, you hash them, then you sign that hash and send that back to the relying party. And that kind of proves that you have everything that you know in here. So timeout, some public key parameters to say, hey, only use the EC P256 keys. That's what algorithm -7 is. And you can also send credentials that you already have. There is some capacity to say, maybe you've already signed into this web page, so don't send me these credentials because I know I already have them and I know they're already you, so don't create a new one, just use one of these before. So a couple of things like that in the protocol that you're able to do. So name the relying party, again, random challenge, key types, and then a suggested timeout is what's in there. This is the response back from the Authenticator. If you're sniffing the USB frames, you would see something like this. This is CBOR, and you can go to a webpage called cbor.me, and you'll be able to then decode that, and it'll look something like this. Which is just some JSON that's been packed together with some binary data. It's an interesting melange of JSON, binary, CBOR, some bit flags. It's a whole bunch of things that are in here that have been able to do that. Yes, you can sniff the USB. Why not? USB is a party line. So that came in over Discord. Sorry, I broke the fourth wall there. Pretend this was a pre-recorded session. All right. So what the web browser is using the WebAuthn and Navigator.Credentials.Create is the actual call that's used in the web browser. Is there. So Navigator.Credentials.Create, if you're looking at the JavaScript and using the developer console with any of those. So, and then the response is the type of formatting, the auth data, and then an attestation statement. I'll show you some attestation statements in a bit. When you use the key, it's pretty similar. You're going into, you're getting a JSON from the web page saying, hey, here's the challenge. This is the random thing you're going to sign. And you've got down there this public key. Here's the credential that I want you to use. So that's the key ID of that key. Please use whatever you think this key is to try to sign this challenge. If I can validate that signature with the public key that you already established with me, we'll know you're good people. So challenge to sign, and then just the ID. It's a very simple response to actually do the authentication. And that's Navigator.Credentials.Get. In the web page. So here's a response in CBOR. There's a response if you decode it a little bit. And again, it's pretty minimal in that it's just the ID of the key that was used, the auth data structure, and then the signature that was generated by the auth data with the private key. So that's what's coming back and forth across there. And you'll see all that in the WebAuthn.me page. You'll have that back and forth. A couple of key concepts now that you know a little bit more about what it does. There's user presence, which is required for any FIDO key. You cannot have a FIDO standards compliant key that does not require some sort of human interaction with it. You won't be, it won't be FIDO compliant. And then there's user verification. User verification is where you would have a biometric or a PIN. And that would prove that not only do you have a human attached to a FIDO key, but you would actually have a specific person attached to a key. And so that's where the user verification is. It doesn't mean that that user that has a fingerprint has any relation to whatever account you're signing in with. There's no, there's no biometrics that go back and forth. All you're doing is you're saying, I have the fingerprint that allows me to use this. In fact, this one, or I can pass through the touch ID to get back to that private key. So again, user presence is required for all of them. That helps to prevent the drive-by and other attacks, things surreptitiously using your FIDO keys. But then user verification is a step higher. Relying parties can request or require user verification to be used. Apple recently kind of flipped this around when they've done some of the iCloud stuff. So we'll chat about that as we go through there. Attestation. Attestation is the concept that you can prove that you actually have a valid FIDO key that was made by somebody. In order to prevent any tracking from going on, there's not a unique certificate. If you look at one of your YubiKeys and you look through there, you will find out that it has a YubiKey certificate that's stashed in there. And you can request an attestation statement out of here, which will say, this is a authenticator that was created by YubiKey, and here's this certificate, and they'd be able to sign some stuff that proves that. This way, you can ensure that you have valid keys. It also allows you, if you find some hardware was compromised, you could potentially protect yourself from that hardware by preventing those keys from being used with your services. The certificate that's being used on here is not unique to this key. according to the spec, it has to be on at least 100,000 keys so that it can't be tracked back to an individual user. That gets back to the privacy parts of this. The interesting thing is the Apple authenticators do not have this. Apple does not ship any sort of private key that's in use by 100,000 different Macs at the same time. So they don't have a way of being able to do this. So keep that in mind. If you do require attestation, and there are some valid reasons for doing that, the platform authenticators are therefore out for you because you won't be able to use them. All right, this brings us to another demo. So I've got a little app here that I've set up for playing around with FIDO, and it actually fakes out like somehow it is a authenticator key. And so I'm going to go to WebAuthn.me, whoops, if I spell it correctly, and go to this page, go to the debugger, and click on this. There we go. It thinks I'm a FIDO key, so I can click here and I can click register. This is pretty much what we did with Safari previously. And you'll notice if I go down here, I can download, here's the attestation statement, and here's the credential public key. So here's all the stuff that's in here. And if I cruise up here, I can actually require attestation. And if I require direct attestation and I make sure that's turned on and I register a new key, now when I cruise down here, I'll be able to actually download a certificate out of this attestation statement. And where did that go? Here's the auth data. Here's the attestation statement, and I can download, I can view the certificate, which doesn't really show up very well in here, but you can actually see this is a certificate, the issuer is the US, and everything else. There we go. If I get a black screen, I need to fix that in this here. But you can see that I've created it myself. It's from Jamf Software because it's a self-signed certificate that's on there. So it's nothing all that fancy. But that's how you can actually validate that certificate is available to you. The other thing that you can see here, if I just refresh this so that goes away, I can actually require user verification, and I can say that it is required. So required user verification to be able to do that. I can then hit the register button here. I will register a new key. Believes the user has been verified. Now, what you may not have noticed, my fingers didn't leave the keyboard. I didn't actually verify myself. It's because, and this is one of the interesting things in the protocol, the web browser platform can lie its behind off about what's actually happening here. And so that's what I've, that since I own the web browser, I'm able to actually flat out say that user verification was used, even though when perhaps it was not. And in some cases, that's maybe not a great thing. And so think about that as you go through this.
I'm Tim.
Thanks, Tim. I think that's amazing as well that you know that now. So, all right, so that's attestation. That's how you can kind of see that. If you have a YubiKey and some other things, you'll be able to actually plug it in and see the YubiKey certificates on there. So fun with YubiKeys there. All right, back into the slides. Another piece called UAF, which is Universal Any Factor. And when you it was U2F, which was Universal Second Factor. Then UAF came out. It was called Universal Any Factor. They've now retconned the name to Universal Authentication Framework. And this is part of the newer FIDO protocols, which allows you to actually have your entire username, password, everything in the FIDO key. So you don't even have to type anything. And this is actually really cool. So effectively, UAF means no username or password. Right. And the only place that I've really seen this in use right now is with Azure. And if you go into an Azure sign-in page, you see something like this, you want to sign in with Windows Hello or a security key. And when you do that, you'll be able to actually see, you won't have to type anything. And I can show you this too, because I've got this set up. So I'm going to cruise over here to Chrome, and I'm going to create a new, there we go, get my cursor back. I'm going to create a new incognito window in Chrome, and I'm going to go into Azure. So bring this down here, portal.azure.com. It already has me signed in, so sign out. It's a good idea to close all your browsers. There you go. If you actually have been signed in, you can ignore that just by using another account. So this is the standard Azure login page. What you can do here is click sign in with Windows Hello, and it's going to ask me for my PIN because this YubiKey I have a PIN on. And then I'm going to hit next. And now my YubiKey is going to kind of blink and I'm just going to touch it. And now I'm signed into my Azure portal without having used any sort of username or password. And so that I think is really pretty cool. And one of the even better aspects of this, since there's already a connection between this key ID, the private key, and everything else back in Azure, it doesn't need to know my username. It just needs to know that I have that private key. If that private key comes back, it's got a way of actually understanding who the user is. So that's really cool. That's UAF.
I'm Tim, and that's amazing.
All right. Thank you, Tim. I think that's amazing as well. Fantastic. All right. So the handy web pages that I already have shown, I think they've already shown up in the Discord channel. WebAuthn.me. WebAuthn.o is another one similar to WebAuthn.me if you just want to kind of play around with the different aspects of it. And then cboard.me is where you can actually decode some of the cboard if you care about that. All right. Using FIDO, and we're coming up on time, so I'm speeding up, and Matt graciously even gave me more time, but I apparently had too many things to do with these slides. All right, so deployment, we already kind of covered this a little bit. No pre-configuration. You have to kind of set the user up already with it, with a temp password to be able to sign in and be able to do anything with that. So platform authenticators make things a little bit harder because they're not supposed to be roamable. And so you'd have to set up a new one for each device that you have. And that's a little bit harder, at least it was until Apple came out with some of the things that they did this week, in the fact that you now can do a roaming authenticator in iCloud, which kind of blurs the lines between what those platform authenticators are and all the other stuff. So, but the harder part there with the platform authenticators is there's no attestation. You can't get that certificate that says this is actually a valid Mac device and you're able to use it. Attestation, again, have a think on whether you need to use this or not. Some IDPs allow you to lock this down, others don't. Here's Okta. With Okta, you just turn on, and they couldn't decide whether to call it FIDO2 or WebAuthn, so they use both. With Okta, you just turn it on, and that's it. You can't determine what can work or what can't work. It's just you get whatever the user wants to use. Right? And don't be confused with the YubiKey section. That YubiKey section is primarily for the OTP stuff. It has nothing to do with the FIDO pieces. So FIDO2, WebAuthn, and Okta. If you're in Azure, if you click through about 9 menus, and I always forget where it is, you can get to the WebAuthn FIDO settings. And here over on the right, you can actually enforce attestation. And decide whether you want to actually do that or not. And if you do enforce it or whether you don't, you have that other option a little bit below that to enforce key restrictions, where you can actually determine a specific set or type of keys that you want to use that are in there. So that could be interesting for you as well. There's another aspect of the protocol called the HMAC Secret. This allows you to actually have a bit on both sides. So that between your authenticator here and your Windows 10 laptop, for example, it can negotiate a new secret between the two of them. It uses some of the elliptical curve key, mine's blanking, elliptical curve key exchange to be able to do it. It's really cool, and it's actually the functionality behind Windows Hello to allow you to do offline authentication. So that's kind of a cool functionality in there. Coming in CTAP 2.1, which isn't finalized, there's an enterprise attestation, which would allow you, if the hardware vendor buys into it, would allow you to have a unique certificate for every user on the keys. So this is kind of FIDO dipping its toe into, could we actually allow this to be kind of pre-deployed? Still pretty early days for this. I don't know how much adoption it's going to be able to get with it, but that's coming down the pike. Credential management. This is also new into CTAP 2.1, where you can actually query your key and figure out how many keys are on here. Right now, this is kind of like the Roach Motel of passwords. Once you create a bunch of keys, you may never know what keys are left on here, where they're used for, anything, because there's no way of getting them back out. With the credential management features, you'll be able to kind of query your authenticator and say, hey, do I have a sign in for Facebook or something like that, and be able to do that. All right. So then credential management requires verification. That's good. That's where you haven't seen this much yet because you got to have a PIN. It's more than just being able to touch the authenticator to be able to see that. There's some interesting examples that they give in the documentation about how you might be able to use this for SSH and some things like that. I don't know how interesting or how it's still early days for that. All right. WWDC happened, still happening. So what has changed? So new in WWDC, Apple came out with a whole slew of APIs for public-private key authentication. When they say public-private key authentication, they reference WebAuthn a little bit in there. What they mean is all the stuff that we've just been talking about. They don't actually use the term FIDO, and I think that's because they're not actually FIDO compliant. That's my sneaky little gossipy thing here for the end of the session. So that's why they don't say FIDO. So, but this is WebAuthn. Everything that we've talked about already in the session, you're going to see in there, and it's going to look familiar as we go through that. So that's all under this new AS authorization set of APIs that you can have in there. Other interesting thing that came out was platform key synchronization. And this allows you to, instead of having a platform authenticator, so instead of, well, you still have a platform authenticator, it's Safari, but instead of being in that secure enclave, the key is now in your iCloud keychain, and you're able to move from machine to machine, and that key will move with you, which starts to make things weird because it registers as a platform authenticator, which if you care, if a user is using a platform authenticator, you'll think it's coming from a specific device. And the initial intent, I think, with platform authenticators was to use them for some device trust, that if I only allowed you to create a FIDO key on this particular device, and there was authentic attestation to it, I'd prevent you from signing in to the corporate page on your phone. With iCloud roaming keychain support, this gets weird because it still says it's a platform authenticator. It's no longer in the secure enclave. Instead, it's a private key now in your keychain, which is in iCloud, which is reasonably secure as far as these things go, but it's not as secure as a hardware enclave that you would have in one of these. So again, I don't know how I feel about this. I think from a consumer perspective, it makes a lot of sense. If I sign into Twitter on this device, I'll be able to sign into Twitter on other devices. That's fantastic. From an enterprise perspective, it starts to get weird. You can enable this by going into the Safari develop menu on the Mac, on Monterey, and then on iOS 15, you got to go to iOS settings developer and pick it up there. So with that, again, it's no mention of FIDO, and I don't know if that's nefarious or not. It's just able to do that. So with that, thanks. I just got told I have more time. All right, so I've got more time. Thank you very much. But I think I'm actually here. I think I landed it maybe even a minute early. So happy to so with that, thank you very much. I would encourage you, if you haven't played around with FIDO, just open up Safari, open up Chrome, open up Firefox, go to WebAuthn.me and start getting a feel for what that looks like. The next step, because that will give you then that platform authenticator. You don't even have to pay anything for that, so that's cool. Then play around with signing into Twitter, maybe going over to Facebook, GitHub. All of them have FIDO authentication in there. And so you're able to do that there. So that's where I would start. If otherwise, if you want to buy one of these, you know, the YubiKey ones are really good ones to start with because you can do a lot with them. They have a lot more than just FIDO authentication. But don't, you know, be put off by some of the other ones. Thetis makes some nice ones. This one was Bluetooth too. It actually lights up. Look at that. Ooh, blinky, blinky. And they may be a little more appropriate. Google has one called the Titan Key. It's actually made by Phaetian. And this is one of the Phaetian direct ones, but it looks very similar. And this has got a little Bluetoothy thing on it too. So a lot of ones out there. Go out, have fun, start using this. Multi-factor is better than single factor. So anything that's being used to help promote security and keep passwords from being simple is great. And with that, I'm going to hop into the speaker Q&A room so that we can answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference. See ya.